This is Women Talking Mitzvot, brought to you by Deracheha and the Stella K. Abraham Migdal Oz Women's Beit Midrash as part of their commitment to bringing women's spiritual worlds into halachic discourse. This entire podcast series has been graciously sponsored by Sigal and Zach in honor of Women's Talmud Torah, Women's Halacha Study, and in merit of Am Yisrael. All of these episodes draw on the rich sources and discussions of women and mitzvot on Deracheha.org. The mitzvah of Chanuka candles has classically been fulfilled in diverse ways, with differences between Sephardi and Ashkenazi households and between women of different communities. This conversation explores several halachic aspects of the mitzvah, as well as ways to imbue our celebration of Chanuka with more meaning.
Hi, Yosefa.
Hi, Shana.
I have to say, I'm really excited for this episode to be talking about Hanukkah. I found that one of the things that I am most enjoying about preparing for these podcasts is that it really forces me to get into the mood of whatever topic we're going to be discussing. And it's been great to start thinking about Hanukkah, specifically as the days here in Israel finally get a little bit colder and darker. It's been a long summer here, but over the last couple of weeks, it's starting to get colder. And to be in that Hanukkah mindset has been really helpful.
Totally. I think it's always a nice milestone, like in the middle of winter, that we have Hanukkah there. And it's something that sort of gives structure kind of to the way that winter functions. And I think, we also mentioned in our last episode the general idea of just bringing light into the darkness. I mean, even without the story and the frame and all of the ideas that we're going to speak about that exist in our tradition, that in general, just the idea of having something that brightens or that shifts the mood in this season, I think is something that there's something just that feels healthy about it. I think many people intuit that in the long winter, which I'm also waiting for the winter. I'm waiting to put on my boots, but it hasn't happened yet. I think that two elements have always kind of marked out as an adult, have always really marked my impressions of Chanukah. When I was a kid, I guess the two things that were most impactful for me were the gifts, if I'm honest.
Of course.
That were part of our family, my nuclear family culture. But more meaningfully, and it was meaningful also then, is that we had this like really epic family gathering, which was a big deal because I grew up in a place that was very far from my relatives. So we would travel for it. And it was a really big deal. And that was something that was a very, I would say, like sweet memory of my childhood. But as I grew older and sort of started looking at the holiday from a different lens, I would say that I had a hard time with the lifting of a lot of the Christmas culture that you can feel around Hanukkah when you celebrate it outside of Israel. And I really didn't appreciate that much. I felt that it was kind of a little bit contaminating what I thought Hanukkah probably was supposed to be. And sort of the fact that they came out at related times and often would even overlap was something that was kind of like an unfortunate coincidence. And I don't think that in modern Israel we are exempt from this. I think that we have also it's become more commercialized, and the sufganiyot culture, which is very yummy.
I'm just laughing because like the sufganiyot have already taken over like WhatsApp statuses. Like everyone's posting with their sufganiyot and the 10 variations, and it like completely dominates the entire month, like starting from Rosh Chodesh Kislev.
Totally. And then, I mean, the market has also catered to that because obviously it's something fun for people on a fun
different kind for each day.
Yeah, that you can spend your money in this season. So I think that as I've grown, I've really tried to think more about how to imbue Hanukkah with more meaning, with I think what I would hope to call Jewish depth to the holiday, and not the commercial or other input from other traditions. And that's something that I've definitely thought about more, and I know that we'll talk about today. Another piece that also comes up for me, and this is going to sound silly, but also because I don't know if all of our listeners in this forum know that I'm really a biblicist, meaning my research and what I mostly teach is in the world of Tanakh, also academically. And there's always been something a little bit hard for me about Hanukkah because it's not a biblical holiday in that way, meaning it's rooted in, we have many retellings of these wars and the victory that we're talking about specifically in Hanukkah in the multiple books of Maccabees, which are in really the second temple literature that don't make it into our canon of
Tanakh.
Kedusha, of Tanakh, but they're books that we have full access to and definitely can and probably should learn. And of course, Chazal speak about the military victory, but also place emphasis on this miracle of the oil, which is happening as they're reinaugurating and purifying the Mikdash after it's been defiled. So there's a tremendous amount of important tradition around Chanukah, but there's always been something a little bit hard for me in the fact that it wasn't kind of just Pesach or Sukkot, that it's not rooted in that place. And one other thing I'll just say about that is that we also know that the Maccabim themselves were aware of this tension, because in one of the recountings in Sefer Maccabim Bet, there's more than one. I'll just read one pasuk. This is retranslated back into Hebrew because we didn't actually discover it in the Hebrew. Vayechugu chag laHashem shmonat yamim ki yemei chag haSukkot vayizkeru et hayamim mikedem vechogagam et chag haSukkot beharim ubema'arot vayit'u beyishimon kevehemot sadeh. That basically in one of the recountings, they say, well, we have this holiday and we're going to have it for 8 days. So it's like Sukkot, right? Meaning they also want to anchor themselves in a biblical holiday. And why do we have that? Because when we were hiding away and fighting our enemy, we were basically in the fields like animals and we couldn't celebrate the holiday of Sukkot. So we're going to celebrate it with a 3-month delay in the month of Kislev. So I'm just saying that like discomfort a little bit, or that sense of authenticity is something that it seems that even in this period of time, or in the remembrance of it 200 years later when it's being written, they're also aware of that. So it's just something that's come up for me throughout the years when I spent so much time in Tanakh.
So interesting. And I'm thinking about the point that you made about the commercialism and the fact that even in Israel, where the two of us live, it's still something that we contend with. Definitely, I feel like our experience of Hanukkah in America was very much affected by the holiday spirit in the air. So much so that I remember even one time, one of my sons woke up on a Sunday morning, and he was very little. He was probably like 4 or 5 at the time, and it was snowing. And he runs to us and he's like, "It's Christmas, it's Christmas." Like that association of like snow and the winter and the holiday season and the lights, so permeates it. Then you come to Israel, and on the one hand, okay, everything's Hanukkah related and the lights are Hanukkah lights. And yet still there's a lot of commercialism around this holiday, as you noted. And I think in my family, we also have a very big family gathering. There's something about Hanukkah, maybe because it's not a chag in the sense of that you could drive and that allows for that. But we have tried to incorporate into our extended party what's called a sevev, which is something I got from Migdaluz, which our students, they have a love-hate relationship with. It's something very meaningful, but sometimes it's also a little much. But a sevev is basically when you pose a question, and it's a question that hopefully, has depth, and you go around and you ask everyone to relate to it. And it's true that in the beginning, maybe people roll their eyes or are cynical about it, but actually we've really leaned into this, and we really try to have a sevev at each of our yearly Hanukkah parties. And you could ask a question, something like, what added light to your life over this past year? Or what's a miracle that has happened to you in your life? Or what's something that you conquered or that you were able to rise above this year? What part of your daily routine lights up your life, or deeper things like what's something that you expected to go one way and ended up being another way and surprised you? Or even what's a koach that you have, some kinds of inner strength that you didn't know about, and then kind of came forth and burst forth at some point. And I found that it is an opportunity to kind of reflect and make people step back from some of the, again, fun and wonderful, but more superficial or commercial elements of the holiday, and get them to tap into something a little bit deeper. So really try to think, as you said, about ways in which we could broaden what this holiday means for us.
Totally. Yeah, I also incorporate those kinds of questions at home, and I think there's all different ways to do it well, and in a way that as long as everybody brings a candor and tries to keep the cynicism away, it works. Yeah. It's when there's that piece that it could be. Yeah.
We like to say Migdaluz blitzinu, exactly. Kind of leave the cynicism at the door, and then it's amazing what could happen.
Totally, it can. It could fly. I guess in our family, I would say a few things that we try and do. One is that we really just try and focus on family time. When we had more rigid schedules, we'll be also making sure to take off time. And that's definitely something that we've tried to make sure to do this year. We have to be going away for a few days. It was a lesson we got from last year because we felt we didn't plan enough, and every year we kind of try and sort of take away lessons from what worked and what worked less. In Israel, of course, there's a lot of Maccabi Tiulim to do.
Right.
Like you can do a lot of things that have to do with the period of Hanukkah, Modi'in area and elsewhere. So there's a lot to do in that front if someone wants to be even like holiday specific. But I guess I would say that we really try and make an effort just to do more activity, meaning especially also because it's usually colder. So we're a very big Tiul family, but to go to a play or there's a lot of things that are often around Hanukkah time.
Right.
And so
Hanukkah themed.
all different things like that. So that's something that we definitely try and make an effort to do. I will say, going back to the point I made earlier, which is that my children do not associate Hanukkah with gifts. I have broken that association in my home. They do have a grandparent who's insistent on it, which is totally fine because it's like, okay, that's as a gift that, Safta and Saba want to do that, but there's no expectation in our home that there's a present. I do try and buy more like books around Hanukkah time because books are really expensive and it's not something that I always spend money on. But we definitely do try and even buy a few more books on Hanukkah, and that like gives them also something to look at over that time. And in general, just to like be more relaxed and say yes to things. And that I think in general just makes kids enjoy the time more. And also family dinners. Some nights of Hanukkah there's family gatherings, but we tend to have many nights where it's just also us and making we do a lot of cooking, but also trying to make something more festive, whether it's latkes or other kind of vegetable related, etc. Like making that be, my kid wants to make sfinjim, which is the Moroccan version of sufganiyot, then okay, go for it,
Bring on the oil.
Exactly.
Yeah. We try to, have one night where we have latkes, levivot, which my kids absolutely love, and they wish that I would make more during the year. But I want it to be a Hanukkah thing. And when we were little, we made Hanukkah cookies with the different, cutout shapes that were related to Hanukkah, which is always something fun. And in general, we try to really take our time after we light the Chanukiot to really sing and to even dance a little bit on some nights. And I think it's really great, actually, besides all the traditional songs, which is mostly what we're singing, that over the last decade or so, there has been a lot of Hanukkah-related songs, especially, in that have come out of America, and like the Maccabees and English songs, which it's great, especially for Jews who are less, especially for Jews who are less affiliated, but for all Jews to have music to connect to during this month when the radio is usually inundated with other music around the clock. So those songs are great and they're fun and they definitely add to the mood and to the spirit. But I wanted to share something a little bit heavier that I have been feeling over the last few weeks that connects back to what you mentioned about just bringing light into the world and this battle of light against darkness. And I feel like it feels particularly relevant at this time. I mean, I've been feeling this for the last few years, but it continues to just resonate. In Israel, it's true that things have calmed down somewhat, but we're still fighting. We're still fighting. I have a neighbor who was really seriously injured this past week in Syria. And we're still fighting on different fronts in Syria, in Lebanon, and Gaza. We're not sure what's going to be with Iran. That's kind of always looming there in the background. And then outside of Israel, things are also so not simple. And I was telling you about this, that I recently came back from a work trip to America where there was so much talk about anti-Semitism and about the recent election for mayor in New York City. And I really had a hard time. It's hard when you pop into somewhere, and you're not there every day and you kind of come as an outsider, even though it's a place where I grew up for 31 years. And all of a sudden you see the changes in the security and around the shul, around the schools, big, iron fences and armed guards and the feeling that Jews are just being discriminated against for being Jews and that they have to really protect themselves. And that feeling of the matim, and the rabbim and the small number against the many. And I feel like, I don't know, more than ever, I could just really use some light in my life right now. And therefore, I am really looking forward to lighting Chanuka candles, both to literally add some light to the world and also to remind ourselves, because this is a big part of what we do on Chanukkah, and it's a big part of Ma'at Tzor, is to remind ourselves that Jews have been in this place before. We have faced malicious forces before. We have been attacked for our Jewish practices before, and we've come out on top. Thank God we've been victorious. And I love Ma'at Tzor for that reason. I love that every paragraph is like a description of a different time period and the enemies that we faced and how we came through. And it basically just feels like we're writing the next paragraph, Biyamim ha'im bazman hazeh, like those days in these times all over again. And I could use some of that right now.
I'll just add that there's one other thing that I've thought about a lot over the past few years when I've sort of been probing Hanukkah for connection to it, even beyond the family, but also just for myself. And I think it doesn't dance around the anti-Semitism theme, but it, for me, dances around my Zionism, which is really just a cornerstone, I guess, of who I am and what my life is at this, for a long time. What's interesting about Hanukkah is that we know how the traditions have developed in order to create what we today call Hanukkah. As I said before, we have different traditions in the different books of Maccabim, and we have the traditions of Chazal, and we have writings throughout different time periods, and we really do, and of course the mitzvah of candlelighting, which we'll get to in a moment. And we know kind of how the traditions developed, and that there was a war and there was a particular period of the war, by the way, which we didn't win in the long run. But we remember the high point of that period of time. And it's really made me think in the past few years about how we remember different moments of history, as we've been living in one that clearly we're going to remember somehow in the future. But
like what narrative will we give?
Exactly. What narrative? How are we going to tell this story? And it's given me hope, and it's connected me to two other holidays. One is a predecessor of Hanukkah, and one is a modern version. The predecessor is the story of Esther and Purim, which also we know from the ninth chapter of Esther that people weren't so interested in keeping Purim as a holiday. The people were not super convinced that whatever happened the year before was something that they should be celebrating year round. And over time, this narrative gains enough prominence that the Jewish community is convinced that it's something that we should all celebrate. But it's very clear from Megillat Esther that that's not what happened immediately, and probably even for quite a number of years afterwards. Chazal phrase it in their own way when they present Esther, obviously posthumously coming to Chazal and saying, right, Kiruni Lidorot, because it's again framing this as there was some sort of struggle to get this to be a mainstay or a holiday that we all observed. And the reason why this is meaningful for me, both in terms of how we narrated the story when it comes to the story of Hanukkah, and also getting Purim to be a holiday on our calendar, is because we are still in the process of figuring out what I would call the Zionist holidays, right? We have people who celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut, the Israel's Day of Independence, with a very religious overtone, and you have others who celebrate it with a very sort of national civilian overtone. I guess I fall more on the religious side of things, and I've leaned into that. Those that don't celebrate it at all, I've definitely leaned into the religious celebrations. It's clearly not something I grew up with. And I think that for me, it's powerful because I think that those holidays, we are still working on the narrative and the tone and the tenor of those religious holidays. I'm using air quotes for those who can't see me, and because it's still a work in progress. But I'm comforted by the fact that we know we can track the progress of the Hanukkah story, and we can sense the progress of the Purim story all from the Megillah itself. And so that to me is something that has become very meaningful for me over time. That dafka, knowing that we decided, we sculpted and crafted the Hanukkah story over a few centuries in a way that became, as you said, an empowering and moving moment in our long winter. And I pray honestly that in Yom Ha'atzmaut, or again Yom Yerushalayim, and these other sort of newer holidays, that they also will become more ubiquitous than they are right now, and that the way we tell them will kind of crystallize over time. So it's something that it's a thought that I've been carrying with me for a long time, and it's not fully formed, but it's one that every year new when I get to Hanukkah, I'm always like, well, hopefully in X number of years we'll celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut like this.
Really appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. It really just gives also added meaning and significance to the events that we're living through now.
I hope so. Another important element of the Chag, and here I want to go back specifically to Hanukkah and the traditions we have about Hanukkah, is actually we have a few traditions about how the beginning of the revolt of the Chashmonaim actually began with women. And I'm referring specifically to, there's a tradition in Megillat Ta'anit, where we basically have the sister of all of the Maccabean brothers, all of the Chashmonaim brothers, that she really encouraged them to begin their revolt. And I'm just going to read a brief excerpt. We know that the Greeks would abuse the Betulot of Israel, the virgins, and they did this for 3 years and 8 months, according to this tradition, until the daughter of Matityahu, right, the Kohen Gadol, that when her wedding day arrived, they sat her down, and at some point she stood up and she basically exposed herself, meaning it was her way of protesting what was about to happen, that she knew that she would be taken or abused
violated.
Exactly, and be violated. And so she exposes herself. When her brothers see this, they obviously are embarrassed or ashamed. They cover their faces. And then she says to them, "Listen to me, my brothers and my kinsmen. If when I stood before the righteous naked without any sin, you would be zealous for me, why are you not zealous when it comes to handing me over to the uncircumcised to abuse me?" Right? You should learn from Shimon and Levi, and she calls on them to be zealous. And basically, this is sort of what turns the tide and encourages them to act.
Yes.
And
this is expanded, from what you said in Megillat Ta'anit, expands on in Utzar HaMidrashim, which is like Midrashim that I was not familiar with, before reading about this on the Deracheha site. Like, it's fascinating to understand all the backstories that were going on here.
Yeah. And I think that what's interesting here are two pieces. One is that it sort of goes back to a trope which has truth, which is that a lot of times the men who go out and fight are the ones who are on the front, but it's often the women back at home who are influencing opinions and have their hand in things, or, the image of the head versus the neck.
Right.
I mean, that's an element that's here in this midrash. But I think it also points to the fact that an age-old war tactic, which insanely was only named as something that was illegal to do in an act of war in the 90s, which is basically violence against women, right? And using rape and other kinds of abuse in order to show conquest and success. Obviously, this came back into our lives in a sick way on October 7th in the Jewish context. But if we just go back to the Hanukkah story, that we really have this idea, this tradition, again, as we said, comes up in a few different midrashic compilations, that there was dafka, and we'll see more places, but there was a woman who sort of shook them out of their slumber and said, there has to be an end to this kind of mistreatment, right? We can maybe figure out how to learn Torah, how to perform other mitzvot in quiet, but there are things that we can't turn a blind eye to.
Part of what has been so upsetting as this has come back into our life in this horrifying way on October 7th is that the women who are usually out there on the front lines fighting against this were all of a sudden silent. And it took a number of Jewish women, or a number of women who are really passionate about fighting, for these issues, to say, this is a problem also when it's Jewish women. And it does hark back to some of these very intense midrashim that you're referencing now. I'm also appreciating that you're mentioning the point about the involvement of women. It's not something that people always know. These midrashim are not things that you understand, like why in elementary schools.
Yeah, they're not teaching that. They're not teaching in fourth grade.
They're not really highlighting this. But one of the unique features of Hanukkah is that we know that Hanukkah is one of the holidays that has a very special connection to women, and that's reflected in the halacha. There's 3 holidays of which the Gemara says that women are obligated in positive time-bound mitzvot aseh shazman grama, even though they're usually exempt because of a principle known as af hin hayu ba'oto hanes, which literally means that they indeed, or they too, were part of the miracle. Now, we say this also in relation to Pesach and drinking 4 cups of wine. We say it also in relation to Purim and the Megillah. But the third place that we say it about is Hanukkah. And we know that Rav Yeshua ben Levi says, Nashim chayavot b'ner Hanukkah, that women are actually obligated to light Hanukkah candles, she'af hein hayu boto hanes, because they were also, indeed, or they were also too, part of the miracle, and therefore they need to commemorate it and to publicize it. Now, Now, there's a machloket, again, as I was saying in the translation, because once you translate, you have to kind of pick a explanation. But Rashi says that afin hayu bato hanes means that women themselves, they effectuated the miracle. They played a big role in it. And that goes back to the midrashim that you are bringing, that they were primary actors in having, a role in these miracles coming about. Whereas Tosfot say that afin hayu bato hanes means not that they were the primary actors, but that they too, even they also experienced the same miraculous salvation as the men. And when it comes to Chanuka, Rashbam follows in the tradition of Rashi that the Chanuka miracle did come about through women, and he specifically mentions Yehudit. Now, it is not 100% clear which Yehudit he's referring to and from what time. But to elaborate a little bit just on the midrashim that you brought a moment ago, it seems to be, the traditional sources seem to refer to Yehudit as the daughter of Yochanan, who is one of Matityahu's sons, one of the Maccabim, and it's specifically that she was one of the women that refused to sleep with the Greek king, and that when he took her to his palace, she fed him a dairy dish that made him very thirsty, and then he had to drink a lot, and then when he got drunk and fell asleep, then she was able to cut off his head, and then after this decapitation, when the Greek army saw this, they kind of got scared since this was their king, and they ran away. Or, as the other midrash that you quoted said, maybe it was Yehudit that somehow encouraged her brothers,
roused her brothers to zealousness.
Exactly, the Maccabim to act. Whatever it is, what's interesting is that the Gemara codifies this as part of the halacha, that because women were part of the nes, either again effectuating it or being included in it, that they actually need to light candles. And perhaps, and we'll maybe talk about this a little later, perhaps this is also why maybe they have an obligation to say Hallel on Hanukkah, which is also interesting.
Right. Yeah, it's also, what's interesting is that we don't really have to pull these traditions out of the woodworks, meaning they're there right in the fabric of the holiday.
Yes.
It's not just we're highlighting it because we're a woman talking mitzvot, but it's actually right there, plain and simple, in the structure of
now in the 21st century writing this back in. It's like in the Gemara, they're telling us straight out, and it has real implications for us.
Yeah, which of course, by the way, important to recognize that story of Yehudit is a clear throwback to Yael in the book of Shoftim, right? It's very much the same paradigm of what she does to Sisera. And interestingly, the brothers, they say, right, the Milah Shem Elai, the throwback to Moshe. So there's interesting also parallels there on the biblical side. I'll just add one idea, which if someone ever learns Be'iyun, the idea of Afenei Be'oto Anis, that concept that women were also in or maybe effectuated the miracle. So there's this idea by Rav Soloveitchik that actually gets quoted, and he basically distinguishes between commandments that include a commemoration of a miracle, like Kiddush and Matzah, where we're mentioning the fact that it's connected to something else, or Yetziat Mitzrayim. And there's commandments who the very fulfillment of them is publicizing the miracle, right? And that would be drinking the 4 cups of wine at the Seder, reading the Megillah on Purim, and lighting Chanuka candles. And as proof for this distinction, he notes that we have a unique bracha before the mitzvah that publicize a miracle, which we say Sha'asanu Nisim. Mm-hmm. And we say that for Chanuka candles and Megillah reading, and Asher Ga'alanu over the wine on Pesach. So meaning there's something sort of fundamentally different about those mitzvot, because the mitzvah itself is the publicizing of the miracle. And so when a mitzvah commemorates a miracle, so the commemoration can still be peripheral to its fulfillment. So not everyone included in the miracle is necessarily obligated, but when the miracle is the publicizing of it, so that anyone included in the miracle needs to take part in publicizing it further, right? So that would where we would place women in this concept, right? If we were in this process, and therefore we're also part of the publicizing of it, and therefore that's why we have a related or maybe same obligation for men and women in these mitzvot surrounding Hanukkah. I think what's also important to note is that the principle of including a miracle, it is a kind of example of how our traditions and history kind of get embedded in the halacha, meaning it's not just a dry question of the halacha. It's actually the way, it goes back to how we frame our story and how we tell our story, that these specific halachic obligations are the way that we are perpetuating our story further. And it creates an awareness that we've all benefited from these miracles, and that through our different actions and our faith, and again, the combination of those two pieces is what really brings about change for us as a Jewish people. And it's kind of right there embedded in the mitzvot themselves that are themselves publicizing the miracle.
Okay. So let's talk now a little bit about the actual mitzvah of candle lighting. Now that we said how much women are considered a part of that, I'm curious first to hear like what you grew up doing in your home and what you do now.
I mean, I guess I line up pretty straight with Ashkenazi tradition. I grew up in an Ashkenazi home. I married an Ashkenazi husband. So what that means is that growing up, we all lit our own Chanukiah. They were all placed together on a tray. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then I might have for a year. When I got married, I think the first year I didn't light my own. I did a little Ishto Kegufo thing. And then I realized that is not what I was interested in doing. I think that might have happened, but I might have deleted it from my memory. And definitely for the past many, many, many years, well over a decade, I've continued to light my own Chanukiah. We all light our own in our home.
Okay, so we're going to have to explain a little bit what you were just
referencing.
Yes. Before that, it's really interesting to note that just like we saw with our discussion around Shabbat candles, our last episode, when it comes to Hanukkah candles, also, we see that the generally accepted practice over time has been to do so much more than what the halacha requires.
We like adding candles.
You know, yes, exactly. We like adding candles. And already, it's really unusual that the Gemara itself already tells us that there's different levels in which somebody could fulfill this mitzvah. So the very basic, essential obligation is for one candle to be lit in every household each night of Hanukkah. So for 8 nights, all you would need is 8 candles every day of Hanukkah, 1 candle. The next level up, which is referred to in the Gemara as mahajin, which is, for people who are zealous about glorifying, comes from like hidor, to glorify the mitzvah. So for people who are in that frame of mind where they want to do more. So then the Gemara says they could have 1 candle each night for each household member. So again, each person, if there's 7 people in your home, so there'll be 7 candles because each person's lighting one, but that's going to be the same thing each night. And then we have mahajin min ha-mahajin, which is like even more zealous. And that is like a lot of what we see around us, which is to change the number of candles each night to mark the progress of the miracle, where we hold according to the opinion of Beit Hillel by adding a candle each night. So on the first night you light 1, and on the second night 2, all the way until the last night you have 8. And you could either do this like 1, Chanukiah, 1 like lamp per household, that each night is increasing. Or in many homes, you'll even have each member of the home lighting an increasing number of candles each day. And I think that's what a lot of what we see. It's definitely what I grew up doing, as you're saying, and what I continue to do. And not only that, like we started pretty young, like with my kids, I would say from around when they were maybe 2.5, 3 years old, and they already understood what was going on and that it's a holiday and something about the meaning, obviously with help. It's fire. We're talking
we like
about here.
Fire in this religion. Yeah.
But we started doing that. And I was thinking, I don't know if it's because there's just more, wealth these days. So people are more able to purchase what they need, or also like today, as opposed to olive oil, which actually is very, very expensive. There's a lot of people that just light wax candles, which are much cheaper. So is it because of that, or is it because maybe there's something deeper at play here, something more significant, which is that, as you said, if the whole mitzvah is about publicizing a miracle and giving thanks for the miraculous nature of this holiday, then it could be that it's just something that people naturally want to tap into. Like A, you said, like that bringing light to the world, and B, if it's not only that we're commemorating the miraculous jug of oil that lasted for 8 days, but we're also thinking about the victory of the few Jews over the mighty Greek army from the Seleucid time period. It could also be that that's something that really resonates with people, and it's just something that people on their own naturally felt like they want to do it at, like at its highest level. And there is something I think powerful about the every night adding a candle. Like I think it would feel different if it was just one candle a night, even though I just want to again reiterate that is totally the basic fulfillment of this mitzvah.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that it's super unusual that we have levels of a mitzvah.
Yeah.
Just meaning no one should confuse this with like, oh, people are machmir on things. It's not the same thing. Built into the construct of the mitzvah, there are multiple levels and everybody does some version of the highest level. We'll see that it reflects itself differently in a moment in different populations, but that's a very unusual thing. We don't have another mitzvah that works like this. We don't even really know how this came to be. It's really a big question mark, but it's something that's interesting. I just want to go back to something you said and explain it because I want to just get to this difference between what is generally Ashkenazi and Sephardi practice, which is that the Rambam takes the view that the second level of Mahadran builds on the first. So what that means is that each household member has a unique set of increasing candles. But Tosfot maintains that Mahadran Mina Mahadran doesn't relate to the Mahadran, but it's independent of this, meaning that you only need one set of candles lit per household, but in a growing progression. Okay,
not so we're gonna each person
exactly we're gonna have for the household, it's gonna grow in progression, but not that each person needs to have their own. According to Tosfot, multiple candles can correspond either to the number of the household members, like in Mahadran, or to the nights. But he was concerned that they basically would get confusing if we did what we all do today, which is essentially that. Everybody does it, and we also go in increasing order.
Meaning, because then you won't know what night it is.
You won't know what night it is, right? And you might lose the significance of the progression. Exactly. So, and this is very unusual, but the Shulchan Aruch actually paskins like the Tosfot, and the Ramah and most Ashkenazi communities paskin like the Rambam. So what that ends up meaning is that
unusual because usually
the Shulchan Aruch paskins like the Rambam, and then the Sephardi communities in follow suit. So what that means is that in more common practice in Sephardi households is that there's one Chanukiah that is lit in progressive order each night, whereas in more Ashkenazi households we have more often many people in the house are lighting their own, and it's in a progressive order. Yeah. Now, what I think is also important to mention here is because you and I are both Ashkenazi women and we're married to Ashkenazi men. So we'll talk in a minute about what may be a question that Ashkenazi women ask themselves. But we have received contact, by the way, shout out. We love getting emails and we love answering them. We've received emails from women, let's say, who grew up in Ashkenazi homes, but then they marry Sephardim. And that has multiple impact points. But one of the most overt ones is Dafka and Chanukah, where let's say women grew up lighting a Chanukiah and then they get married and now there's only one in the home. So what happens now? And so I just want to mention two things here. One regarding Chanukah specifically, and another regarding in general this idea of marrying a spouse with a different halachic background and something about that. So the first is that it's important to note that for a couple who this is relevant for, and if they're going to consult with their authority, that's also obviously important. But an interesting idea to consider is that while there might be one Chanukiah being lit, actually the man and wife can switch off being the one who light it every night. That's a perfectly.
You're saying if an Ashkenazi woman is sad to give
that
up
she's
that
not lighting, then just
lighting.
know that as a very normative halachic position, even though it doesn't get so much press, is that it doesn't actually matter who lights the candle every night. Meaning they could both switch off lighting if that works for them. Of course,
and
consult.
Different
nights they'll do different things. It's also just important to consider this question about, in general, changing customs when marrying, where it sort of, in the past, it was more maybe of an automatic that a woman would marry and she would just take upon herself all of the customs of her husband. But in many marriages, that has become increasingly actually counterintuitive to the sensibilities of the marriage. And so I just want to mention something that's significant, meaning ultimately we want to create a unified home life. That's ultimately what we want to do sort of as a halachic home. But when it comes to all personal matters for women and their halachic lives, there's no halachic need for women to change that. So that could be not changing their nosach of tefillah, meaning when it comes to buying sidurim for the home and what the children will daven, there definitely is more of a tradition to say that they'll follow the nosach of the father. But there's no need for the woman to have to change her personal mitzvah observances.
Any personal mitzvah that a woman does, that's between her, and her and her relationship with Hashem, she could continue to do in the traditions of her parents in the way that she grew up. So that's the nesach that she davens. That's the way that she's tovelet in a mikveh. that's the way that you might light Shabbat candles, all different kinds of things where there may be differences.
Yeah, where there is a conflict between the two traditions, that is where, on one hand, we do have more of a halachic tradition to say that perhaps the husband's traditions pervade over the wife's. But I also want to say that there are many really, really significant authorities. I'm putting in here, let's say even a tshuva by Rav Nachum Ravinovich, who was one of the biggest poskim of the past century, the Rosh Hashiva of Malei Adumim, where he actually writes that a couple can choose to adopt some of the wife's customs together instead of the husband's. But all this really should be pursued and should seek guidance with the halachic authority. I just want to say I've taught many couples, Shana, who have tried to figure out how to navigate this. Yeah. It's out of a deep love for the traditions they grew up with, and that sometimes changing them or shifting them can feel like a loss. And I think it's important to recognize that and figure out how to navigate that.
Especially in Israel, where there's like a real kibbutz galiyot and so many different people from so many different countries and so many different traditions, I find that these questions come up even more because like you're often going to have couples where there's an Ashkenazi Sephardi mix.
Totally. And there's more halachic details here. You know, again, the idea of we take this idea of changing halachic practice based on the idea of someone who travels and arrives at a new place where they have different halachic practices and they mean to stay there, they intend to stay, that they should take on the practices of the local place, but we have different conversation, whether it's a stringency or it's a leniency, and these are all the halachic ideas that sit at the root of this question of basically looking at a woman or a man sometimes that coming into a marriage, they've arrived in a new place. Meaning I like the frame. I love the halachic frame of this conversation because it is a journeying together. Yes. But in our marriages today where we're really creating this journey together more than people did in the past, it's also nice to know that there's a lot of room in the halachic conversation to consider how we want to blend that. It's not this just blanket, okay, I have to do everything in that way, especially, again, it's always coming from a place of wanting to keep to our traditions of our youth.
And it's something that a couple should feel that they should communicate around, you know,
Totally.
and that they should consult with people and that there's room to have these conversations, which I think is part of the point that is important to highlight. Also, I just want to throw in that according to the Ashkenazi minhag that you quoted from the Ramah, who says, like Rambam, that multiple members of the household should be lighting a progressive amount of candles. The Ramah says that if you're concerned about the question that Tosfot raises, that it's going to be confusing and how many people are lighting, you know, how many candles and what night is it. So he says, so try to make sure that each, you know, Chanukiah is in a distinct place where there's a little bit of a space between them. So, and I think in today's culture, people understand that, especially because we're not just lighting random candles. We're lighting, we're lighting on a Chanukiah. So you could see how many candles, how many little things of oil are lit on each one. And that also definitely helps with that. I'll also add that even within the Ashkenazi world, and you referenced this a little bit before, there's different customs about who lights, especially when it comes to women. So if a woman lives on her own, or if she lives with other women, let's say you have a group of roommates or, you know, who have an apartment together, or let's say there's a single mom with her children, then of course it's going to be the woman that lights for the household. When there's a married couple and they only light one Chanukiah, so then often the minhag, as you mentioned, it might be for a husband to light for the house, even though, again, let's emphasize that they're fundamental halacha says that either the husband or the wife can light, and certainly when one spouse isn't home, of course the other one should be lighting and they don't have to wait for them. In a household where each member lights, then not only is it fully permissible, but it's even praiseworthy for all of the female members of the household to light. But even with all that, as you mentioned, there are some homes where the wife might have the custom not to light because of this Talmudic concept that we have called Ishcho Kegufo, where his wife is like himself, meaning that when he lights, and it's also in other mitzvot as well, where when he lights, it's like they're one body, they're one unit, and he has his wife's obligation is also being fulfilled through his lighting. And I would say I've heard different reactions from couples who follow this, because there are some women who get married who really, really delight in this idea of being one unit and in lighting together. And she stands by his side as he lights, and they're lighting one Chanukiah because that represents the two of them. And there's a strong feeling of like we are one unit. And there are others who even, though there's something nice about that idea because they grew up lighting their own Chanukiah and now they feel like that's somewhat taken away from them, it could be harder. So there's different poskim here and different opinions about it. And I'll just say that even the Mishnah Brura, who in his Shar HaTziyun says that the concept of Ishto Kegufo could apply here and that a husband could light also on behalf of his wife, he still leaves room, if a woman wants to light voluntarily among the Mahajin, since women really do have an independent obligation to light because of that principle of Afin Hayubo Tohanes. It's interesting also, like kind of the spin-off from this, what happens is that sometimes when there's a household where the mom doesn't light, so then sometimes the daughters don't light because there feels like sometimes something weird if like the daughters are lighting but the mom's not lighting. So sometimes in those homes, none of the women light, either because their mother isn't lighting or perhaps because the Chatam Sofer suggests that originally when lighting was once done outside, which in Israel, by the way, a lot of people still light outside, but when everybody lit outside, so maybe people raised that maybe there's an issue of tzniut or whatever. There were questions raised about that, and it could be that even though now many people light inside, that was still maintained. But I'll just say in the communities that I'm a part of, many, many, many women, whether they're married or single, they do light their own Chanukiyot. And perhaps because Rav Soloveitchik and Rav Lichtenstein strongly believed that even married women should light for themselves. So there's all different kinds of minhagim here and customs, and each one of them has different halachic backings. And that's why you'll really see people doing different things here.
So I actually just want to mention a few other customs actually, that I think are observed with a varying degree over Hanukkah. Again, the Chanuka Candles is the big one, and the Sufganiyot and the Levivot, but there are a few other customs that also come up in our tradition. We have this question because unlike Shabbat candles, where the purpose is to use the light, right, so that we won't trip on each other, right, and to be able to eat by the light, exactly, and shalom bayit.
Enjoying.
So with Hanukkah, we actually don't use the candles. We're not supposed to use the candles. It's not supposed to have a purpose, and because the point is that they're there to commemorate a miracle, and we're not supposed to get any benefit from it. So that would mean like doing, again, we don't do this normally, but like counting money, let's say, by the light of the Hanukkah candles, or again using them to read a book next to it. That's
or
the one
if there
that
be
comes
a
up for me.
blackout, that's the only thing that's lighting up the home, that would be an issue.
Exactly. So that would be sort of seen as like a disrespect to the candles, which are a mitzvah article. And we say this also in Hanerot Halalu, that we don't want to use the candles. So it's also maybe to have this like Kedusha that's reminiscent of the menorah and the Beit Mikdash. Again, it's a very different kind of candle than the Shabbat candles that we spoke about in our previous episode. So one of them is this point about not using the candles. And perhaps a corollary of that is that there's an Ashkenazi minhag that developed also not to do melacha for the hour after we light candles. Now, what does this mean?
Meaning for the time during which the candles are burning.
Exactly. For the time that they're burning, which they could burn for much longer, by the way, depending on what kind of candle you're using. Exactly, using oil. Now, this wouldn't include, by the way, cooking. Cooking we can do, again, not by the candlelight, but we can go and cook because it's talking about melacha that's prohibited on a Yom Tov. Okay, now, Yom Tov, you're allowed to cook. So we do, there is this minhag. I'm curious, like, among our listeners, who's makpid on this.
Do you do this?
No, but I don't even know what malacha I would be doing, because usually it's family time. Right. So I'm not going somewhere. Maybe that would mean like being makpid not to like look at a phone or talk on the phone.
That's a good one.
I don't mind that minhag ever. I'm happy to use that minhag all the time. Yeah. But I think normally
I didn't grow up with this either, but there is something that's nice about it.
I think it's just anything today in our modern world that like forces us to be present, I think is probably a good minhag. So that's one that's interesting. And this custom also, for some reason, became slightly more observed among women. Like we see that also in the Shulchan Aruch. He writes that women were nohagot not to do malacha for an hour after. I don't know if that's because they were the ones who did malacha afterward.
Maybe.
Like, don't go and hang your laundry, ladies. I don't know what exactly they were referring to, but that is associated more so with women. Another one we have is about making festive meals, which I think many people do even without thinking, like meaning it's just obvious to them that this is what we want to do on Hanukkah. We already mentioned that the dairy products in commemoration of the Yudit story, of which she fed Holofernes in that story. The Bach takes us a step further and says that, again, we women specifically have a reason to eat festive meals because we were the ones who, as you said, created this miracle or effectuated it into the world. And just one fascinating example that I came across by learning the Deracheha articles for on Hanukkah is that apparently there was a chag that was called Eid el-Banat, which is the holiday of the girls, of Banot, from North Africa. And this is from Dr. Yael Levine, who's quoted on the Deracheha articles, that she says that after lighting the seventh candle of Hanukkah, so it was on the seventh night, right, the girls and women would gather for a special celebration. They would eat dairy foods, drink wine, and dance. In Tunisia, the housewife would bake honey cakes and confections in honor of this day, and they even had a minhag to send mishlochei manot and give gifts to the girls. And they had also this minhag in Libya. They would visit each other. It sounds also like kind of like a combination of a Rosh Chodesh thing, that also gets associated with women. It became an occasion, I guess, but in the case of Hanukkah, also because we were the ones who were in the miracle. So it's just, I think, a really beautiful idea. Again, there's more detail. You could see it there on the website. But basically saying that, women were part of the essence of this holiday. And so in some cultures, they had like an actual event specifically for women on Hanukkah, which is fascinating.
Mm-hmm. I'll also note that this idea of ve'en lanu reshut leishtamesh behem ela lerotam bavad, that we don't have permission to use the candles for our own needs, and we're just supposed to delight in seeing them and in commemorating and publicizing the miracle, is not something that everybody is aware of. And yet the practice of having a shamash, of having an extra candle as part of the Chanukiah, is connected to that, because that's, maybe why we have an extra one. Exactly.
Right.
So that in case, that we could say that you're using the shamash. Okay. So that's, I think we put out a lot of information there about candlelighting and about some of the lesser known or lesser practiced minhagim that are also very relevant and significant. And I think the holiday that you just mentioned that was observed in North Africa is also something very special, that it's good to know that there's different things also going on in different communities, and there's different minhagim that different Eidot bring to the beautiful, rich tapestry of Judaism. I want to come back to one other thing that I mentioned briefly earlier, which is about Hallel, which is that Hallel, in the special tefillah that we say on many holidays, is usually considered another mitzvah aseh shazman grama, another example of a positive time-down mitzvah from which women are exempt. But because the Hallel on Hanukkah was specifically enacted because of the miracles, so some poskim think because of that if women are all in on the miracles because afhin hayubo tohanes, then they should be obligated to recite Hallel, and that it's an additional opportunity to really reflect and to commemorate the miracles that happened. Others hold that it's not obligatory, but that certainly women can say Hallel voluntarily. And since it's left as a machluket, it is a good idea if women can, as much as possible, even if they don't usually typically make an effort to say Hallel, it would be good to do so on Hanukkah. And women who don't usually recite the bracha on something voluntary, as is the case of many Sephardi women, so then they shouldn't recite one here, since it's not clear if it's 100% obligatory. Now, with regard to Hallel itself, I just want to say on a very personal level that I have really never felt such a deep connection to the words of Hallel as I've been feeling over the last few years. And every single time that we recite them, I get emotional because I feel that they are deeply, deeply resonating. I mean, Hallel is a beautiful tefillah, and it's always been that way, and I've always enjoyed saying it and singing it and davening it, but never have I felt it in a way way that like I really cheer up. And I specifically remember that a year ago, last Hanukkah, we had a very big tefillah one morning at Migdalos, and hundreds of women came to sing and to daven Hallel together. And right before we started, were you there? Were you at that tefillah? I don't remember if you were there or not, because I think it was the last morning. But it was like really, really, really special. And right before we started, Rabbanit Esti spoke about how even though Hallel is filled with praise and filled with thanks to God for the miracles that we've experienced, it interestingly doesn't shy away from the challenges and the serious hardships and even true affliction that we face also. And she shared that she thinks that perhaps maybe that's why there's so many verses in Hallel that we say twice, that we repeat. And perhaps it's to give us an opportunity to focus on these like different meanings as we're saying the verse. So like, right, we say, Hodu Hashem ki tov ki l'olam chasto, or we say, Odecha Hashem ki anitani vatihi li lishua. I thank you, Hashem, for you answered me and became my salvation. Now, the first time that we say it, we may be thinking on the very pure level, like, thank you, Hashem, that you answered so many of my prayers since last Hanukkah. Thank you that, Hamas and Hezbollah and Syria and Iran have been seriously weakened and they're not as powerful as they were beforehand. Or thank you for bringing all the live hostages home. Thank you for the fact that Hadar Golden, thank God, has finally been laid to rest. And yet then we say the line again, Odecha Hashem ki anitani vatihi li lishua, almost maybe now not as a thanks, but as a request. I thank you for you answered me, and I hope vatihi li lishua, and I hope that you become my total salvation, because there is still need. We still know that things aren't 100% where we want them to be. And perhaps this is also, by the way, why maybe we have to say a bracha at the beginning of Hallel, or that a bracha is part of Hallel, because we say this bracha, Asher Kedisham B'Tzotav B'Tzvanu, L'Krod Hallel, that you commanded me to say the Hallel. And we're like, why would we need to be commanded? It should be so obvious. We have to thank Hashem. And then someone could say, no, actually, because it's hard to thank Hashem when people are still being injured. It's hard to thank Hashem when many people are still being called up from Miluim. It's hard to thank Hashem when we still live with looming threats. And Hallel is basically telling us, no, actually, you're commanded to find the things in your life that you need to have gratitude for. And I'll just say that that's a perspective, that perspective of being able to focus on the things that we're grateful for, even as things are difficult, is something that has totally, totally sustained me during this time. Like, I just try to savor the things that we are grateful for and that we are thankful for and that we appreciate, and to be in them even as there's a lot of still really difficult things that we're facing. So I wanted to mention that. And one other thing that also I've been really carrying with me the whole year. And again, on this Shabbat, I was together with my sisters and we were singing Chanukah songs to get in the mood. And we were singing that slow song, Chasof Zeroa Kachecha, which is the last paragraph of Ma'od Tzor, a beautiful melody that was composed by Baruch Levine, that's sung by Yaakov Shweki. And in that last paragraph of Ma'od Tzor, we beg Hashem, we say, please, Chasof Zeroa Kachecha, please reveal your holy arm, hasten the salvation, avenge your servant's blood from the wicked nation. And then the end is Ki archa lanu hayeshua ve'ein ketz limei hara. For the salvation is too long delayed and there's no end to these bad days. And last year at that gathering, which was led by Odelia Berlin, who is a very talented musician. Yeah, we've mentioned her before because she's so talented and she brings so much spirit. So when we sang that song after we finished Hallel and like the event was closing, so we sang it the regular way, and then like loud and clear in the microphone, instead of saying the Ein Kates the Mei Hashua, that there is no end to these bad days, she started singing the Yesh Kates, there is an end to these bad days, which subsequently I heard was also something that Rev Juckman would do when he sang. And I found it so powerful. It gave me hope that yes, there is going to be an end to these days. We are going to get to a better place. We are already in a better place. And with the perspective of a year, and thinking back to like last Hanukkah was not an easy time here. And when she said V'yesh case, and you're like, okay, really? Maybe. And then like, yes, thank God we're in a better place. And that is something that I try to really be grateful for. And even goes back to what you said earlier, that Hanukkah was a high. It was a battle that we won, even though long term, maybe we didn't win the overall war, and still look at this, we made a holiday out of it, and being able to appreciate those really powerful moments, even when it's not the end of the story, is also something that's extremely significant.
Yeah, well, first of all, you just shared a lot of really powerful thoughts about Hallel in general, and I'm certain that it's going to be very meaningful for many people listening. And the only thing I want to add to that, like, beautiful panoply of musings of yours, is just the idea that whenever, and this is to me the beauty of the calendar, like whenever we find ourselves, I think we even said it one time, but whenever we find ourselves coming back to something and then we reflect on where we were the previous time we were at it. And when it comes to Hallel, so we actually get to say it quite a bit, right? It's not like Pesach where you come back to it once a year, but Hallel is something we have the opportunity to say every month, and we have the opportunity to say on obviously all of our chagim and also on our rabbinic chagim as well. And I think that to me is in and of itself a very powerful piece of like this. Also, you guys are saying the gratitude practice, as we say in the modern world, right? I can't even tell you. I have like 5 people in the past 2 weeks who told me that they started journaling their gratitude moments, which is essentially what Hallel is coming to teach us to do. It's exactly that. But even this idea of like every month we take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half hour to sit and to say these words. Sometimes they'll resonate more or less. And each time it's a kind of a question of like, where is it hitting me this month? You know? And I know that's what I notice that on myself. Like, am I being moved by this now? Am I not being moved by this now? And then I ask myself, why is that the case? Do you know what I'm saying? What is barring me from connecting, or what is dafka making me connected? I've been at other events of Odelia's where she also said V'yesh ketzli me'ashua, and it's a very, very powerful thing because it's exactly that piece. It's saying, here's the thing you usually say. And so when you add a twist, right? Yes. It like catches you very, very much. And
that's
I think that's really powerful. And as you said, reflects a belief that already has proven itself, right? We already are in a very different place with the imperfections. We have to say, lehodot v'lehalel.
Yeah. Getting emotional right now. Okay, Yosefa, what's your takeaway?
I think I have a lot because I actually loved many, many parts of this conversation, Shana. I think that this was, to me, I just love the mix of the ideas and the personal thoughts and also the halachot. And I think the halachot here have a lot of depth to them in the way that they're practiced. But I think that one idea that is sort of sitting with me, and I mentioned it earlier, but I think I'm going to express it a little bit differently now, and I hope that the way I express it is going to be okay. But I think that Hanukkah has a yin and yang that's sort of built into it, right? It has the male element, which is the battlefront and the war. And it also has what happened on the home front and the way we remember it on the home front, meaning we have the traditions about the women and their protest in order to keep the home a home that was pure in a way that was being violated. And the way that we remember Hanukkah is dafka by bringing that light into the home, right? Meaning it's saying we were there and fighting because we had to do that, but the way that we have sort of told our story and effectuated it into our history is to bring that light into our home. So, right, it's bringing that back into that home front space. And I think that this to me also, and I'm just, experiencing it through the past 2 years of our life, where we've spoken so much in Israel specifically about, the battlefield and the home front, right? The chazit and the oref, right? You have those who are out and those who are in. And yes, much of the time, but certainly not always, there may be a male-female division, but in so many homes, it's also shifted in different ways depending on what people do in their work and their army lives. But I think that this question of what will we bring into our home, right? How will we tell this story? What will these traditions be like? Will it be another blip on a screen of a long, long war, or will we take something from it in the long run? There's no answer to that question right now. We are still living something, although it does feel like we've a little bit turned the corner in what we're living. But that the questions of how we'll remember this time period, what we'll take with us, how it will mold the story of Am Yisrael is something that for me, Hanukkah represents very, very deeply. I brought it up earlier when it comes to like the Zionist holidays, but even in these moments we're in right now, I often ask myself when I'm going through something challenging, and I literally think to myself, how am I telling myself this story right now? How am I experiencing it? It makes all the difference in how we process and manage our way through that. So I guess for me, I'm leaving that with a question of, I hope that in these challenges, we're going to eventually bring them into our lives with light, right? And with our gratitude. But that takes a lot of perspective on things, but it gives me hope that we'll be able to do that, because here we do that with Hanukkah.
Wow.
What about you, Shayna?
So I actually want to share something that my husband Judah said as I was preparing for this, and I was thinking about the different elements. He was sitting at the table near me, and I turned to him at one point and I said, Judah, like, what's on your mind? If I say Hanukkah, what's on your mind this year? And literally without even stopping to think, right away, he's like, that we're stronger than we think we are. That's what came out of his mouth. And I was like, wow, yes, we're stronger than we think we are. And that is a big message of the Hanukkah story, that it's good to remember that we could believe in ourselves. It's good to remember that we could believe in Hashem. It's good to remember that we could have hope, that things can turn around, even when it seems like there's no chance. And that hit me very powerfully. And also one other thing that I really appreciate about this Chag, and you mentioned it now, but take it a little bit of a different direction, is the mix of the physical and spiritual, like you said, like the war, which is very physical, and then the miracle of the jug of oil, which is very spiritual. But I'm also thinking about it in the perspective of like the miracle of the oil is something totally supernatural, like spiritual in the sense of like, we had nothing to do with that. Like it's a miracle that's completely and totally connected to God and completely dependent on Him. But when it comes to the battles, obviously, it has a lot to do also with the effort that we make and in believing that we're capable. And even though it was a small army, them getting out there and not giving up. And I love that. I love those ideas in life about our hishtadlut together with our bitachon, like, and that mix. And the fact that Hanukkah represents the two of them and represents the two of them together is a reminder that life is about that. It's not only about our bitachon in Hashem. Obviously, that's huge and it's underlying and it's it's everything, but we still have to put in our best effort and we still have to show up and we still have to believe in ourselves that we're capable. And then, God willing, Hashem will back us up.
Chanuka Sameach, Shayna.
You too.
Did this conversation move you or cause you to think about the topic in a new way? Please share these episodes with friends and family and start conversations about meaningful mitzvah observance. Make sure to check out the show notes for links on how this topic is discussed on Deracheha.org. Contact us with thoughts and questions at womentalkingmitzvot@gmail.com. Looking forward to our next conversation.